Welcome in everyone to another special edition of the Bully the board meeting. Oz on Insights. We have a special guest today, Tej Seth from Sumer Sports. Going to talk a lot of football, a lot of data, a lot of analytics. It's going to be a good one, so let's get right into it.
Give a damn about a hater when I feel like it. Not today, not today, not today, not tomorrow. Get out my way, please. I'm trying to get paid. Not today, not today.
Tej, welcome in, my friend. It's great to have you on the show. Appreciate you being with us. For those who don't know Tej, number one, you're living under a rock. Number two, a quick introduction. Data scientist, Sumer Sports, okay. Co-host, Stats and Scheme podcast, also by Sumer Sports. Big Data Bowl participant, honorable mention in 2023, and just content connoisseur on Twitter and X. Had a post or tweet featured by ESPN. That's like a Mount Rushmore of accomplishments already at your ripe young age, Tej, of what is it, 22, 23, however old you are. But not to be forgotten too, one other point. Tej has been instrumental, frankly. He's helped guide and develop the model and database that we use. And frankly, we wouldn't be here today without him. So a huge thank you up front to you, Tej, for all the work that you've done for us. So all that said, man, it's an honor to have you on. How you doing?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I've known Seth for a long time, but really nice to meet the rest of you guys here. And I have to say that out of all the podcasts I've done, that's probably the coolest intro video of anyone that I've been on. I'm very pumped to talk today now because of that.
Yeah, we'll have to
Let's
clip
go.
that so you can just post that right on your socials. And we'll just end with a mic drop, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, man. I think I mentioned it briefly, but despite you being in the front nine of your career in the football analytics world, tell us a little bit for the people who are not as familiar with you as we might be, how you got into this world, how you got into analytics, what came first, your love of math or your love of football?
Yeah, so it really started from a young age, like I'm sure it is with a lot of you guys, where I loved following football, following sports in general. Starting in probably like elementary school or maybe even before that. But it was really just the football side of things. While I went throughout school, I thought I was like a pretty good math student, but wasn't like exceptional or anything. And then I got to college, and I originally thought I was going to be pre-law, just because like I thought that's what I was interested in. Realized quickly that was like way too much reading that I could handle. So I ended up finding out that there was a club at college called the Football Analytics Society. And I didn't know anything about football analytics at the time other than some very basic stats. So I showed up, and I still didn't know how to code or anything at the time. I was just going to these meetings every week, and I was learning a lot. I was learning about metrics that we all talk about now, like expected points added and completion percentage over expected. And I thought it was really interesting to talk about these metrics, learn about how they're made and how they can be used and stuff. So that was really cool. COVID happened at the end of my freshman year, so we got sent home from the dorms. I did all the other COVID stuff, like I watched Tiger King, and then I realized I'm like, all right, I just start figuring out like how to code or something. Like I want to do this football analytics work that like other people were doing. So came across Ben Baldwin's tutorial on Twitter, started learning how to code in R, and it was like pretty difficult for me at first, but eventually like it clicked, and I was able to learn how to actually like put together some graphs. And that really led to me posting those graphs on Twitter. And I was just able to get better at posting and how I wanted to display my data and my analysis on Twitter. And so that led to me meeting Eric Eager, who is currently my boss at Sumer Sports, and gave me an internship at Pro Football Focus before I graduated and I joined Sumer.
That's dope, man. It's quite a long ways, just in a few short years for sure. So appreciate that. You mentioned it because of one of the questions that I had too. We deal with a lot of people on TikTok, and not to be offensive, but you don't get the smartest bunch sometimes in that crowd, right? And I think largely a more broader point is we have a lot of people just not familiar with how football analytics works in general and who Sumer Sports even is, frankly. I know there's a lot of people in your world and more people that we might be familiar with who we know that Sumer Sports has a very reputable stance in the community. But tell us a little bit about Sumer Sports, particularly the work that you do there, and how Sumer Sports kind of fits into the puzzle of it all.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. And by the way, I do watch a lot of guys' TikToks, and I see the comments. Sometimes I want to jump in and just like fight some of these people, but I usually swallow what I'm going to say there. But yeah, so Sumer wise, like I think that Pro Football Focus (PFF) has done a really good job working with teams, providing them with data that they can use to build their own models, make their own predictions, and evaluate players across the league, both college and pro. But oftentimes we find out that because these analytics departments are so small right now at NFL teams relative to other sports, NBA, MLB, NHL, you're seeing that there's just not enough time to do everything that you want to do if you're working for an analytics department. So where Sumer wants to step in is to have this business to business B2B product where they work with NFL teams on actually taking the data and turning that into actionable insights for what your roster can become. So if you take all of your resources, whether it's draft picks, cap space, the different contracts that you currently have on your team, you take the pool of available players through trade, free agency, and the draft, and you come up with some type of optimization to figure out the best ways to approach your roster. That's really where Sumer wants to step in. And then mainly what I do is I work on the consumer side. So it's all about trying to grow Sumer's brand, promote it on Twitter, put out a newsletter, an article, a podcast, stuff that can kind of show what we're working on without revealing too much, but also just show that we have talented data scientists that can work on these types of projects.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. And obviously we see a lot of the stuff you do, and it's super cool. I love the game matchup figures. If anybody's not using those, make sure you go see those. A ton of good data in those matchups, so you can actually see what the data actually say about these teams. One thing Kevin mentioned when we were introing you was the Big Data Bowl, and I know you did some stuff. I think it was in 2023 around SAC, but really wanted to get your your thoughts and experiences on that, because that's such a unique thing. And also, to piggyback off that question, want to get your thoughts on unique data types like next gen stats and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point to bring up. So I competed in the Big Data Bowl twice. I judged it this year. The first year I competed, I was a headless chicken. It was my first time working with tracking data. So it did not go well. But going into the second year, I had two teammates, Arjun and Joey, who were very, very helpful in shouldering some of the workload that I felt my first year. And yeah, like you mentioned, Seth, we worked on an expected sack model. And what we were really happy with was we built a dashboard out where you could place all 11 defensive players around the field, and it'll tell you their each individual chance of getting a sack. So you could kind of experiment with different formations if you were a defensive coordinator and kind of see what would increase your chance of getting a sack on a play. And the tracking data is really difficult to work with. For anyone out there that wants to do a project with the tracking data, it's a giant data set, because it tracks where every player is on the field and the ball every 10th of a second. And so it becomes these data sets that are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of rows to work with. So you have to have the right infrastructure set up on your computer in place. My MacBook Air was having a tough time handling it my first time. But so yeah, next gen stats wise, I think next gen is working on so many cool things. I think that when you are able to look at things like separation on all routes instead of just routes when are targeted, some charting companies do, that's a plus advantage right there. The fastest ball carrier stuff, I think, has become really interesting when looking at the speeds that players can be used on, especially when looking at different run concepts and which players are able to take advantage of running outside zone and the speed that they get to within a second of the play. I think there's so many cool things that are going to come out of next gen stats, and they've really just hit the tip of the iceberg with the tracking data, because models will continue to be developed off of it.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It does seem like it data and analytics are going in a lot of different directions, but it seems like some of the data that may come out of that may be the kind of next generation of edges and angles, but super interesting and super cool that you got to work with that. What was your ultimate takeaway from the sack model? Like, what do you need to do to increase sacks?
Yeah, I was actually cool. I talked to someone at a team about like the model like once it was finished, and their main takeaway, which was also my main takeaway, was I think that if you put your edge rushers in positions where they can get a tackle one-on-one, it's massive for increasing your chance of getting an edge. So like we had different formations in the thing. So if like they were lining up in a formation where the tight end was in line, if you put the edge rusher on the opposite side, like that was going to increase their chance of getting a sack. Or if they had a running back chip on that side, lining them up wider, like in a wide 9 stance, was like increasing their chance of getting a sack. So I thought that was really interesting, was lining up the edge to kind of make sure that they had a clearer path to the quarterback while sacrificing some other positions, still increased their chance of sack.
Oh, wow. That's super cool.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So it's fair to say that you're a football fan, right?
Yes.
Yeah, right. And so, my question, everything you just discussed about, being a data scientist and looking at the next gen stats and what you've learned about the game, does that change the way that you are able to watch football games or just enjoy the game versus when you're just a typical average fan versus knowing what you know now? Has your love for the game changed as a viewing fan?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. Because I've thought about this a lot this past year, where when I was in college or high school or whatever, like I wasn't working in football. I was just, sometimes I do it as a hobby, but like it was mostly just like I would just watch the games, read articles, like whatever. But now that I'm working in it full time, I feel like it has changed a lot of how I watch games, because when you're like fully immersed in NFL data, like 40 hours a week, like and then you go and you watch a game, you're already like seeing like, oh, like the data told me that the 49ers are really good against the blitz. And then you see that actually play out in the game. So it's very reactionary, with like the data often leads you to what you end up seeing in a game. And like I found myself like when I was in college, I loved NFL games. Like I'd get really excited for NFL Sundays and Thursday night, Monday night. And then college football was like secondary, like, sometimes to do homework on Saturdays and whatever. But this year I felt like it flipped for me, where I was really excited for college football because it was more new to me. Like I wasn't looking at college football data the entire week. And NFL data or NFL games, like I still got excited about, but it was just like, it was less new just because I was looking at that data like the entire week before the games.
Yeah.
That's super cool.
So to piggyback kind of off Steve's point or question, would you also classify yourself as someone who knows ball?
I mean, I'd like to think I do to an extent, but not. There's definitely like, people that are lapping me probably. Yeah.
No, I preface that as the first part of the question, because I can imagine someone in your position, and certainly also for people like Eric, Ben Baldwin, all the Twitter analytics community, particularly, at least a couple times a day, you're getting, all right, nerd, why don't you just put on a jockstrap and like actually play before you comment on the game? That type of stuff you get, right? And someone, a wise man once says, or has in their Twitter bio, that, games are played on the field, not on spreadsheets, right? So how do you balance the two, or how do you see the balance between what you do in football analytics blending together with traditionally knowing ball? Like, can those two things coexist? Or right now there seems to be this kind of like oil and water type of mixture between the two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up. I think that both sides, I guess if there are sides, like really can benefit each other. Like whether it's an analytics side or you approach football from a very heavy film background, like they only really can help each other. And like oftentimes on Twitter, just because of like the way that social media is set up, it turns into like you mentioned, like an oil and water, like where they're fighting against each other when they should be building on what's working on both sides of things. And like some of the best analysis that I've seen done, whether it's like when Stephen Ruiz will write an article for The Ringer, or like Robert Mays on the Athletic Football Show, like when they do like deep dives into something, they do such a good job of blending both sides together. And I think that more people can be like that in general, where they can coexist and they can continue to learn things off each other. And like me personally, like I always try to seek out areas where I feel like I'm not necessarily 100% keyed in on like I am with the data. So like whether it's listening to like different podcasts or reading different articles where like they're heavy in scheme breakdowns, like I feel like that's been really helpful for me because it sometimes even inspires like something I want to look at data wise, and like it's a good back and forth when it comes to that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one other point I have on that. So, as someone who has taken a very non-traditional kind of learning curve with analytics, like I didn't study it in college. Like all my exposure and learning about it has come after the fact, and kind of throughout our process of being this bully the board community, and being on the public with this type of stuff. So, yeah, I agree. I agree with that comment or with that sentiment in general, but I don't know if there's like if you guys have like your own Reddit subreddit about like, damn, how do we reach these people? Like you're continually putting out information to the public, trying to literally just inform, provide information to the public or to whomever may be to make more informed decision. And that's kind of in the same vein with what we do. We have models that we use to predict outcomes, and it's like, okay, here's our information, kind of putting it out into the world. Let's get some feedback on it. But do you guys like does Sumer have a position on this, or you personally, where you think it's your responsibility in any way to actually try to, lead what's the phrase? Lead the horses to water?
Yeah, I mean, so the thing that we talk about at Sumer all the time on the consumer side is we don't want to make some of the mistakes that we've seen other like data focused companies make online, where we're not going for hot takes that we're just basing off data. We're not going to make like sweeping conclusions just off of like what our data is telling us. What we're really trying to do is provide people with data that can only help them. And like if there's a certain group of people, which there is, like that doesn't want to look at it, doesn't want to use it, or doesn't think it's useful, like that doesn't really bother us, because like they're not going to be into the stuff that we're doing anyways. But we're trying to get that middle group where they want to learn, but they're maybe not well versed in analytics, just because of like how they kind of approached the game of football and sports in general. And like we want to really hit on that group where it's like, if we can give you data, if we can explain what it means, maybe that can help you when it comes to your experience as a fan, as an analyst, or if you're betting or playing fantasy football or different stuff like that.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that real quick? So I want to take it a step further, right? So you mentioned the folks who want to learn but maybe aren't there yet. Just like kind of based off your interactions and what you've seen your folks, your company's interactions being, if you had to give a rough guess, like what percentage of the folks that you interact with are, no, we don't know what we want to learn, versus, no, not only do we not want to learn, we hate you for trying to teach us. Like, there's no way. No, you're wrong. You know what you're talking about. Like you get that extreme side as well as like anti-learning. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's actually really funny. Like the analogy I always use is like the two-party system in politics, right? Where you have like you have like people on two sides, then you have your moderates, right? So it's like the percentage wise, like I think like 20-30% of people are like in what you just described, where it's like they just don't want to learn, like they're going to get mad about it. But you have like that 40-50% group in the middle that is just like, they're just general football fans. Like, maybe they put down like an occasional like same game parlay or something. And like, we just want to we're not going to provide straight up betting content just because like that's not what we're doing. But like, we want to be there for them if they want to use our data to build out their SGP or to set their fantasy football lineup comparing two players. Like that's really what we want to be there, is like the people who want to use information to help them and are willing to use that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you had mentioned you're looking at football data 40 hours a week. So I'm curious, and this is a broad sweeping question, so answer it however you want, but like this has been a really interesting season, specifically on offense, but what kind of trends have you seen in this season, the NFL, and what have you seen kind of translate into data throughout the season?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we've kind of seen this the past 2 years, but I think it was especially prevalent this year, especially with the teams playing in the Super Bowl. It is a yards after catch league at this point, and I think that's pretty cyclical. Like it definitely could bounce back to being a high average at the target league. But when you look at the main trend going on in this season right now, you have a situation where in 2020, because of whether it was COVID, stadiums or defenses weren't as prepared because of a shortened offseason or just quarterback play in general, average depth of target was really correlated with offensive production, the highest that it's ever been, basically. And then every season since then, that's continued to dip, including this season, where now it's yards after catch is more correlated with your offense's production than average at the target. And you see these two teams in the Super Bowl. The 49ers have had 6.4 yards after catch per reception this season, which is first in the NFL. The Chiefs are at 6.2, which is second in the NFL. So you think about like what Mahomes was able to do 2018 through 2020, just airing the ball out, especially to Tyreek Hill down the field.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's a totally different way that Mahomes plays, where he is hitting Rashee Rice short and he's hitting Travis Kelce before the first down marker. And because they're seeing two high safeties, they're able to convert first downs still. So it's really interesting to watch this dynamic play out.
Yeah, that's super interesting, which is kind of, I guess, against, well, scoring is a different thing, right, than what you're describing. Like, it's how efficient our offense is, and the scoring may be correlated a little bit differently.
Right. Yeah. I mean, scoring has dipped for sure. Like whether you look at even something like touchdowns per game or you look at EPA per play by season, like it has gone down. And I think there's a lot of factors for that, especially this year with just so many quarterback injuries and like the tier 1, tier 2 quarterbacks. But even I think it was trending that way anyways, despite that.
Yeah. I think this is the second most quarterback starting. I know last year it took the cake. I think it was 66 unique quarterbacks.
Yeah. I mean, there was a ton of starting quarterbacks this year, and like it was similar to 2017. I feel like where it's like the certain types of quarterbacks that were getting injured were like going to be top 12, top 14 productive quarterbacks. So you had a lot of those happen where it affected that.
And one final thing here. I know you're a through and through Lions guy. So first and foremost, congratulations. Like it's got to feel. I mean, you came up a little bit short, but it's got to feel a little bit like a win. Hopefully next year you get all the way there. But like, can you talk about your Lions a little bit? Like, what have you, as put your analytics hat on? What did you like from them and then their offense and defense, and what did you not like?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm like a classic pessimistic fan where like I'm always just like oh, how are they going to blow this lead? Like, how are they going to mess up in this game? But
I mean, you've been burned before.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's justified. I think like the thing that this season showed is like you have, and I don't know if I really believed in this probably before the season or even last year, where it's like you do have this shift where it's like they can be trusted in a lot more situations now than before. I think that Dan Campbell, even though I think I was skeptical of him at the beginning, just because I didn't know if just like a straight up culture coach would work, he nailed his coordinator hires between Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn on the offensive defensive side. And that's been a huge plus in the Lions' success, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And then when you have these, younger players that are all able to produce like early into their career, everyone from like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Penei Sewell, Sam Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs on offense, and then to defense like Aiden Hutchinson, Brian Branch, like players like that have really stepped up. Like I think it provides for a pretty exciting future. I don't know, if they'll like they're a lock for the NFC Championship next year, obviously, but they are going to be in the mix, even with the division getting tougher, with the NFC getting tougher, which like makes me excited to be a fan.
Oh, what?
And I gotta say, no, go ahead, Kev.
Okay, sorry. I was going to say, to kind of segue off of that, fans are notorious for having blind spots, right? About their team, about, everything's looking up, right? Everything's got to be peachy and rosy next season or whatever, next week, next month, whatever it is. Let me zoom out on that idea real quick, though. So the traditional casual fans who, watch the games, aren't really into analytics, I think we all kind of understand what their blind spots are. From somebody who is, spending their days 40 hours plus a week looking at data, understanding how these things play out during the games, what do you think are some of the blind spots of the analytics community at large with respect to football? Are there things that are still yet to be uncovered, things that are not very predictive? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one thing that I've been thinking about, and this is not necessarily like related to the games particularly, but just kind of like what analytics preaches is the NFL draft. You'll often hear NFL analytics people saying like, oh, like the team that traded back like is probably going to win the trade because of like our trade charts that show like the draft curve is flatter than what people think, what NFL teams think. And I do think that's true to an extent, but there's certain biases when we build out draft charts, when we build out fourth down models, where the better teams are drafting later, like the teams that are better at developing talent are drafting later. So like, that's why even adjusting for that, you can't always adjust for that enough where you're going to get some selection bias in that sample of picks 16 through 32 look like, they're less much of a drop off than like the Jimmy Johnson trade chart says, which I think that's somewhat true, but not as true as like we think it is. And that applies to fourth down decision making as well, where the better teams are going for it more often on fourth down. The better offenses are going for it more often on fourth down, and they are getting to the red zone more often as well. So it might spike up the conversion probabilities of our models because you have good offenses going for it more. You have good offenses going for it more in the red zone. And so that might also throw off some of our models as well. So it's like acknowledging these biases, especially selection bias, survivorship bias, when we put out our models, or like having a, some error bars instead of just like a set number in trade charts in fourth down models, I think can go a long way for us in the future.
Yeah, and actually that's a good segue. And I want to say first and foremost, I'm a Bears fan. So as a fellow NFC North person, I want to say congratulations. I no hate at all. If there's anyone who I can sympathize with, it's the Lions. I was definitely rooting for you guys to make it all the way. With that being said, let's talk about Dan Campbell for a second. Because he's the kind of guy who I feel like would hit on 21 in blackjack. And you made a good point about the conversions, about teams who are going on the fourth down, maybe better offenses, or teams that draft later, maybe better at developing players here. So we hear commentators all the time saying, oh, the analytics say to do this, whether that's going forward on fourth down and X many yards or going for the 2-point conversion. But knowing what do you feel that what we're hearing and what we're seeing as fans of the game is more just cherry picking of the data? Or do you actually believe that the NFL is gearing towards more data driven decisions consistently versus here and there, we kind of want to do it and we do it when it feels right? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really good point to bring up. I think like when you'll hear announcers that say that, and I think Greg Olsen does a really good job of kind of like blending what he's seeing versus the analytics, but other announcers, when they're talking about the analytics, like says to do this here, like I think that sometimes they're using that as a crutch for like it like the go for 2 down 8 isn't really analytics. Like it's just like basic math, where if you work out the probabilities, like you'll see that it's usually better to go for 2 down 8 in a game. Like they'll usually just like lump that in with analytics, which is something that I think is like an interesting angle on like how they're putting it out on broadcast. But I mean, I do think that with like how successful the Prime Vision broadcast has been for Amazon, that we'll start to see other kind of broadcasts or maybe just like a sideline reporter that's kind of dedicated to understanding analytics, being able to explain it in that 30-second mark in the future as we continue to go on, because that's what we've seen with MLB broadcasts, NBA, NHL broadcasts, is they've leaned more into the numbers. So I think even though NFL is slower to get there, they'll eventually lean more into that as well.
Yeah, RIP Greg Olsen. Yeah, I hope he gets another shot somewhere next year, because he's one of the best, honestly. Like he's only been doing it this year, right? Or maybe 2 years.
No. I think he's been doing it because there was that one time where he was like on Seattle, and then he was in the booth for like a bye week when he was in the league.
Oh, if you count that, okay, I guess. Yeah. I mean, fine, whatever. I don't care. That's fine. Count.
I mean, what do you do in your off weeks?
Yeah, true. Fair point.
Just hop in the booth.
Definitely not. No, but I digress a little bit. So I want to go back to a point we kind of discussed a little bit earlier, and maybe the answer is real time sort of tracking data that you alluded to. But how do you see this the football analytics community, I guess, progressing as a whole? Like what is next here? Because oftentimes I'll think to myself, like, damn, what more how much more data can we actually have for what we're seeing or what's going on, But every year through whether it's the Big Data Bowl or other outfits where there's just more nuanced conversations, more nuanced data coming out about the game. What's your thoughts on where you see this world going? Is it farther beyond even tracking data?
Yeah, I mean, I do think tracking data is like the thing that is going to be used just so much because there's so many things that you can kind of get out of the tracking data. But I think that the biggest like kind of unsolved question in football right now is separating play caller, quarterback, and supporting cast. There's been a lot of attempts at it, but I think that people have had trouble when it comes to just fully separating that because even though you can use on-off splits for like a lot of things, and we see that in the NBA, like NBA has gotten really good at whether it's Darko or like adjusted plus minus, like they can get really good at on-off splits in the NBA. In football, it's really tough because offensive linemen usually don't miss plays. Play callers obviously never take a play off, and quarterbacks usually don't miss plays. So it's hard to know what will Brock Purdy look like without Kyle Shanahan, right? Like, what does Tua look like without Mike McDaniel? Like, we just don't know the answers to the questions yet. And I think that someone who's really smart and has a really good model will figure out an answer to that eventually. But I think that that's like the next thing that Football Analytics like hopefully works on as a whole, because I think that the play caller thing is a crucial part of what's missing in a lot of like player level models right now.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really
wild.
cool.
That's
Yeah,
wild.
no, for sure. Just kind of taking a step back here, Tej, just kind of looking at everything we discussed today on all the different things you can do with data and how cool this is and how it permeates throughout the game. If you have someone who is really excited or interested by this, but maybe a little intimidated about all the words and things you just threw out here, like what would be your advice for someone who's maybe interested in getting to that next level of understanding the game using data? Like, what will be your advice for them to kind of ease them into this world?
Yeah. So, the first thing I would say is I recommend that you pick up coding if you don't already know it, but it's not for everyone, right? Like there's still ways to do data analysis or to get well versed in football analytics without knowing how to code. Coding is the most straightforward path to doing it, whether you learn how to code in R or Python or whatever other language you feel comfortable with. But if you are, like you mentioned, like intimidated in it, or you are like struggling, like I think that you should have patience. But if so, it's not for everyone. Like some people have skills that they're better suited with. So I think having an open mind, I guess, kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier, is one of the best things that you can do, and that goes for both directions. It goes for wanting to kind of bring in as much information as possible, but also being skeptical about things that are known as like truths in football. And I think that someone that I work with who became a football fan after college, like after not watching any football basically their whole life, they became a football fan after college and started working for Sumer, is like one of my most interesting conversations every week, because he doesn't have the same, like, you run the ball to set up play action and like those types of things that we have like just picked up just from like talking football with our friends and stuff throughout the years. So it's like always interesting to hear like a contrarian opinion on those things. And like, I always have to remind myself, like, maybe it's me that's not thinking about this the right way. Like I should actually investigate what he's talking about.
Nice.
Also,
That's
to promote,
interesting.
Tage has a bunch of stuff on the internet. That's actually how we found him. Like, you have a bunch of tutorials and videos of getting people into NFL Fast R, I think, on your YouTube, don't you?
Yeah, so I did that for the Football Analytics Society I was talking about at the beginning of this episode. There's 4 videos on R and 2 on Python about just like how to load in the data, how to make like a basic graph, like all that stuff.
Yeah.
So hopefully they've still held up, even though they've been filmed like a year ago. But yeah,
I'm sure they will. So start there. You can see somebody's code. You can pick it apart. You can use it to try to understand. I mean, it's a great way to get introduced to it, but also have a guardrail to actually get output.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Tej, man. A lot of good information here. A lot of good nuggets. Again, I think for anyone who's watching us who might be a fan of our content, if you're not already, please start following Tej, at least on Twitter, at Tej FB Analytics. I got that right, correct?
Yes, yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Or just search Tej Seth Twitter and he'll pop up. I think you're a big baller, man. You got like 25K on there or something like that. So
Well, I think Twitter, has been infiltrated with bots lately, especially the betting bots. But I think a lot of those followers comes from there. But yeah, hopefully some real followers in there as well.
Yeah,
well worth a follow. Well worth a follow, bot or not.
Bot or not, yes. But yeah, Tej, I appreciate your time today, man. A lot of great stuff, a lot of great insight. Thank you again for the work that you've done for us. And I'm sure we'll be talking to you again down the road. So, all right, everyone, appreciate you tuning in to the episode, to the Ozone Insight today. For Kevin, Seth, and Steve, Tej, thanks again for joining us. We'll see you guys next time.